He thought he had won after divorcing me by text message, but my final revenge left him ruined. I remember exactly where I was when my world shattered. Standing in our kitchen, my kitchen now, I suppose, stirring a pot of his favorite mushroom, risotto. The same recipe I'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. The one Gustavo always bragged about to his business partners when they came for dinner. The wooden spoon moved rhythmically through the creamy rice as my phone buzzed against the marble countertop. One new message. "It's not working anymore. I want a divorce." The spoon clattered against the stovetop. 8 words. 15 years reduced to 8 words, sent through a text message like canceling a dinner reservation. I read it again, then again, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. Outside my penthouse window, Chicago's skyline glittered in the early evening light. The same view I'd admired just that morning, thinking how far we'd come from our starter apartment in Logan Square. Back then, Gustavo was still a junior partner at his law firm, and I was putting my own career on hold to support his dreams. "We're building something together," he'd say, kissing my forehead before heading to another late-night meeting. "Everything I do is for us. Us. What a foolish word to believe in." My phone buzzed again. Not Gustavo this time. Charlotte, my sister, probably calling about Sunday brunch plans. I let it go to voicemail. The risotto was burning now, filling the kitchen with the acrid smell of scorched rice. Fitting, really. Everything I'd cooked up in this marriage was turning to ash. I dumped the pot in the sink, watching steam rise from the blackened mess. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking. Not from grief, though that would come later, but from something raw and electric coursing through my veins. Rage, maybe, or revelation. The intercom chimed, startling me from my trance. "Mrs. Reynolds? There's a courier here with documents for you." Of course there was. Gustavo always did pride himself on efficiency. "Send them up, Marcus." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Too calm, too controlled. The doorman must have noticed too. He hesitated before responding. "Are you sure, ma'am? I can hold them here if you prefer." Sweet Marcus, always looking out for me. He'd watched me bring Gustavo's dry cleaning in and out of this building for years, seen me planning surprise parties for his birthdays, noticed me growing quieter as the late nights at the office grew longer. "It's fine, Marcus. Thank you." While waiting for the elevator to deliver what I assumed were divorce papers, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked the same as I had that morning. Dark hair neatly styled, makeup perfect, wearing the cream silk blouse Gustavo had bought me for Christmas. Isabella Reynolds, the perfect corporate wife, now reduced to a soon-to-be ex. But something was different in my eyes, a hardness I'd never seen before. The courier arrived with a manila envelope. I signed for it mechanically, noticing how steady. My signature looked on the receipt. Inside were indeed divorce papers, along with a letter from Gustavo's law firm, not the one where he was now senior partner, of course. He'd chosen one of his competitors for this. Strategic thinking, always his strong suit. I spread the papers across our dining room table, the one where we'd hosted countless dinner parties for his colleagues and clients. The legal language was cold and precise, laying out the division of assets he proposed. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every detail was carefully considered, every angle covered. He'd even included a non-disclosure agreement, presumably to keep me from sharing any uncomfortable truths with his professional circle. My phone buzzed again. Charlotte, persistent as always. This time I answered. "Bella? Are you okay? I just got the strangest call from Karen at the club. He's leaving me." The words came out flat, emotionless. Gustavo sent divorce papers. Silence crackled over the line. Then, "That son of a bitch, I'm coming over." "No." The force in my voice surprised us both. Not yet. I need to think. Think about what? Bella, you can't be alone right now. Did Karen mention why she called you? I interrupted, a suspicion forming in my mind. Charlotte's hesitation told me everything. She saw him at Maple and Ash last night. With someone. A younger woman. They looked intimate. Of course. The pieces started falling into place. The late nights, the business trips, the new cologne, the sudden interest in CrossFit at 45. I should have seen it coming, but I'd been too busy being the perfect wife, too invested in maintaining our carefully curated image. How young? I heard myself ask. Karen said she couldn't have been more than 30. Charlotte's voice was gentle, as if softness could cushion some associate from his firm, apparently. I walked to our home office. My hands had stopped shaking now, and sat down at my desk. The same desk where I'd helped Gustavo prepare for his partner interview 12 years ago, drilling him with practice questions until dawn. The same desk where I'd written countless emails to his clients' wives, arranging charity galas and golf weekends, while putting my own law degree in a drawer. Opening my laptop, I pulled up our joint accounts. Gustavo had already transferred most of his assets elsewhere, leaving only what he was legally required to maintain. Thorough, methodical Gustavo, who'd taught me everything about how he thought, how he operated, how he won. Bella? Charlotte was still on the line. What are you thinking? I looked at the divorce papers again, at his signature bold and confident, at the bottom. He expected me to crumble, to accept his terms quietly and fade into the background of his success story. After all, that's what I'd been doing for 15 years, right? I'm thinking, I said slowly, that Gustavo forgot something important about me. What's that? A smile spread across my face, one that would have shocked anyone who knew me as Gustavo Reynolds' agreeable wife. He forgot that I graduated law, school 2 places ahead of him. The sun had set over Chicago, the city lights now twinkling like cold stars. In our bedroom, I could see Gustavo's clothes still hanging in the closet. He'd want to send someone to collect them soon. His side of the bed was still made with military precision, as always. Everything in its place, just the way he liked it. Time to change that. I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a business card I'd kept for years. Linda Martinez, private investigator. She'd given it to me at a fundraiser 3 years ago, after watching Gustavo flirt with a donor's wife for an hour. Just in case, she'd said with knowing eyes. Sometimes we need to be prepared. As I dialed her number, I felt something shift inside me, like a sword being unsheathed. Gustavo thought he'd written the ending to our story, but he'd only written the beginning of his downfall. He thought he knew me. Sweet, supportive Bella, who'd sacrificed everything for his dreams. He was about to meet the real me. Linda Martinez speaking. Linda, this is Isabella Reynolds. We met at the Children's Hospital benefit a few years ago. I paused, letting the blade of my voice sharpen. I need your services, and I need you to be thorough. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Inside, I began to plan. Linda's office wasn't what I expected. After years of attending Gustavo's corporate gatherings, I'd grown accustomed to sleek furniture and city views. This was different. A converted industrial space in West Loop, all exposed brick and metal pipes. No pretense, just purpose. Tell me everything, she said, sliding a cup of coffee across her desk. No cream, no sugar. Like her office, Linda dealt in unadorned reality. And I mean everything, Mrs. Reynolds. Even the things you'd rather forget. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, feeling its heat ground me. 3 days had passed since Gustavo's text message, and I'd spent them methodically documenting our life together. Bank statements, property records, social media posts, 15 years reduced to data points and paper trails. "Please call me Isabella," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mrs. Reynolds feels obsolete." Linda nodded, dark eyes studying me over the rim of her own coffee cup. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes, and I was grateful for that. I'd had enough of Charlotte's concerned calls and Marcus's pitying glances. "Start with when things changed," she said. "There's always a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, when the shift happens." I closed my eyes, letting my mind drift back through the carefully curated timeline of our marriage. 6 months ago, the Morrison case. The memory rose sharp and clear. Gustavo coming home late, practically vibrating with excitement. He'd just landed the biggest corporate merger case of his career. I'd prepared his favorite meal, but he barely touched it, too busy outlining his strategy. "This is it, Bella," he'd said, using my nickname for the last time I could remember. "This case will make me untouchable." "The new associate he's been seeing," I continued, opening my eyes to meet Linda's gaze. "She's on that case team. Karen, from the club, saw them together at Maple and Ash, but I'm certain it started during the Morrison preparations." Linda made a note in her leather-bound notebook. "What's her name?" "Sophie Lancaster, 29, graduated from Northwestern Law 2 years ago." I pulled out my phone, showing Linda the firm's website. He promoted her to senior associate last month. Unprecedented for someone her age. "You've done your homework," Linda observed, something like approval in her voice. I had a lot of practice, being the perfect corporate wife. The bitterness in my laugh surprised me. "Do you know how many young associates' careers I've watched Gustavo shepherd over the years? I know exactly how he operates. The mentorship, the late-night strategy sessions, the gradual shift from professional to personal." Linda set down her coffee. "You're angry." "I'm furious." The admission felt like breaking a seal. Not just about the affair. He made me small. Year by year, choice by choice, he turned me into this ornament. The supportive wife who gave up her own law career to manage his life. And I let him. And now? I pulled out a USB drive from my purse. This contains everything I could access about the Morrison case. Financial records, meeting schedules, email threads I was copied on while managing his calendar. "There's something off about this merger, Linda. Gustavo's been working unusual hours, having encrypted calls, meeting with people who aren't on the official council list." Linda's eyebrows rose slightly. "You think he's done something illegal?" "I think he's done something he doesn't want discovered." I leaned forward. "And I want you to find out what it is." She picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. "This kind of investigation takes time. And money." "I have both." I pulled out another document, a statement from my personal account, the one Gustavo didn't know about. "I've been setting aside my own money for years. Call it intuition. Call it insurance. Whatever's happening with the Morrison case, it's made him reckless, confident enough to throw away 15 years like it meant nothing." Linda studied me for a long moment. "What exactly do you want, Isabella? Revenge? Money? Your old life back?" The question hit me harder than I expected. What did I want? The past 3 days had been a blur of anger and action, leaving little room for reflection. But now, sitting in this stark office with its unforgiving lighting, I had to face the truth. "I want justice," I said finally. "Not just for me, but for every sacrifice I made, every dream I put aside. He thinks he can simply replace me with a newer model and continue his perfect life. I want him to understand what it feels like to lose everything you've built." "That kind of justice comes with a price," Linda warned. "Not just financial. Are you ready to be seen as the bitter ex-wife? To have your mutual friends take sides? To potentially destroy not just his life, but others?" As well? I thought about the text message, so casual in its cruelty, about the perfectly prepared divorce papers, about Sophie Lancaster, young and ambitious, stepping into the role I'd once played. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I said, my voice low. "He's not even trying to hide her." 3 days after ending our marriage by text, he took her to Gibson's, our anniversary restaurant. The maitre d' called to confirm our usual table, and I had to tell him we wouldn't be coming. Ever again. Linda's pen moved across her notebook. Public displays are often about marking territory, establishing a new narrative. Exactly. I stood up, walking to the window. Below, Chicago's streets teemed with life. People rushing to meetings, drinks, dates, all their stories intersecting and diverging. Gustavo's writing a new story, with himself as the protagonist who found true love, and Sophie as the young genius who captured his heart. Which makes me... The discarded first draft, Linda finished. Not anymore. I turned back to her. "I want you to investigate everything. The Morrison case, Sophie's sudden promotion, any irregularities in the firm's dealings. I want to know who he's meeting, what they're discussing, where the money's really going. And I want it all documented." Linda closed her notebook. "This won't be quick or clean. Once we start pulling threads, we don't know what might unravel." "I understand." I returned to my seat, picking up my now cold coffee. "You know what Gustavo told me on our first date? That the key to winning isn't just knowing the law. It's knowing people's weaknesses, their pressure points, the things they'd do anything to protect. And you know his?" A smile curved my lips, but it held no warmth. "Better than anyone. I spent 15 years learning them, cataloging them, watching him navigate his way to the top. He never thought I was paying attention. Not really. I was just the beautiful backdrop to his success story." Linda stood, extending her hand. "I'll start today. But Isabella..." Her grip was firm, grounding. "Be careful. Men like your husband, when they feel threatened, they don't always play by the rules." "Good," I said, gathering my purse, "because neither do I. Not anymore." Walking out of Linda's office into the bright afternoon sun, I felt lighter somehow. The past 3 days had been about survival, about processing the shocking speed with which my life had imploded. But now, with each click of my heels against the pavement, I felt something new emerging. My phone buzzed, a news alert about the Morrison merger. There was Gustavo's name, quoted about the deal's promising future. And there, listed among the legal team, was Sophie Lancaster. I saved the article, adding it to my growing file. Let them think they were writing the story. I was about to become the plot twist they never saw coming. The thing about being invisible, about being relegated to the background of someone else's narrative, is that people forget you're watching. They forget that every slight, every dismissal, every casual cruelty is being recorded. They forget that even perfect corporate wives have breaking points. Gustavo was about to remember, and so was everyone else who'd watched me fade into his shadow. I hailed a cab, giving the driver an address I hadn't visited in years, my old law school library. It was time to brush up on some very specific areas of corporate law. After all, the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served precisely, strategically, and with absolute attention to detail. The law library hadn't changed. Same worn oak tables, same green-shaded reading lamps, same musty scent of leather bindings and ambitious dreams. I ran my fingers along the spines of corporate law volumes, muscle memory guiding me to the sections I needed. 15 years ago, I'd practically lived here, fueled by coffee and determination, graduating ahead of Gustavo despite his predictions. Isabella Reynolds? I turned to find Professor Catherine Walsh staring at me with delighted surprise. She'd aged gracefully, her silver hair elegantly styled, her posture still commanding respect. 15 years ago, she'd been my mentor, the one who'd seen my potential, the one who'd been most disappointed when I chose to step back from my career. Professor Walsh. I smiled, genuine warmth spreading through me. I was hoping I might run into you. Catherine, please. She gestured to a nearby study room. Join me for a chat? I was just about to have my afternoon tea. The small room felt like stepping back in time. How many hours had I spent here discussing cases with her, learning to think like the lawyer I'd never become? She pulled out a thermos and 2 cups from her bag. Some habits never changed. So, she said, pouring the tea, what brings my star student back to these hallowed halls? Last I heard, you were managing your husband's social calendar. The slight edge in her voice wasn't lost on me. Actually, I'm here to research securities, law, particularly as it pertains to merger disclosures and insider trading. Catherine's eyebrows rose as she handed me a cup. Interesting choice of topic. Any particular reason? I took a sip, letting the familiar blend of Earl Grey ground me. Let's just say I'm returning to my original career path, though not quite, in the way I'd planned. Does this have anything to do with the Morrison merger? I saw your husband quoted in the Journal yesterday. My cup paused halfway to my lips. You've been following the case? Hard not to. She leaned back, studying me with those sharp eyes that had always seen too much. It's an unusual deal. The timing, the valuation, the players involved. Several of my colleagues have questioned the numbers. I set down my cup carefully. What kind of questions? Catherine reached into her bag, pulling out a folder. I've been collecting articles, analysis reports, call it academic interest. She slid the folder across the table. Though I suspect your interest might be more personal. He's leaving me, I said quietly, for a 29-year-old associate he just promoted. A world of understanding in that single syllable. Sophie Lancaster, I presume? She was in my advanced securities class 2 years ago. Brilliant, but ethically flexible. My heart picked up speed. Tell me about her. Ambitious to a fault. The kind who sees rules as suggestions. Catherine's lips thinned. She wrote a fascinating paper on exploiting disclosure loopholes in merger negotiations. Technically impressive, morally concerning. I opened the folder, scanning the collected articles. Patterns began emerging, unusual stock, movements, unexpected board resignations at Morrison Corp., cryptic statements from key shareholders. The numbers don't add up, do they? I looked up at my former mentor. The valuation? The timing? No, Catherine said simply. They don't. And in my experience, when numbers don't add up in a merger this size, someone's usually adding elsewhere. I thought about the encrypted calls Gustavo had been having, the mysterious meetings, the sudden urgency to finish the deal. Would you be willing to help me understand exactly what might be happening here? She studied me for a long moment. Are you sure that's what you want, Isabella? This kind of knowledge, it comes with responsibility and risk. I spent 15 years being safe, I replied, steel entering my voice. Look where that got me. Catherine nodded slowly. Then let's start with the basics. Pull out volume 17 of Securities Regulation. We have some catching up to do. For the next 3 hours, we dissected securities law, regulatory requirements, and the intricate dance of corporate mergers. My mind felt alive, awakening from a long slumber. This was who I'd been before. Sharp, analytical, hungry for knowledge. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Found something interesting. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. I have to go, I told Catherine, gathering my notes. But could we continue this? Maybe over lunch next week? My office, Tuesday at noon. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. Isabella? Whatever you're planning, be careful. Men like Gustavo, when they've built their lives on careful facades, they don't expect anyone to look behind them, I finished. I know. I helped build those facades. Outside, the evening air had turned cool. I checked my phone again. 3. Missed calls from Charlotte, a voicemail from my mother, no doubt having heard the news, and an email from Gustavo's lawyer. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my rideshare app, entering an address I'd found in my morning research. Time to set another piece in motion. 20 minutes later, I walked into Le Colonial, the French-Vietnamese restaurant where Morrison, Corp's CFO, dined every Thursday. Thanks to years of managing Gustavo's social calendar, I knew the maitre d' well. Mrs. Reynolds. Henri's welcome was warm, though I caught the flicker of concern in his eyes. News traveled fast in our circles. Your usual table? Actually, Henri, I'd like something near the bar tonight. I'm meeting an old friend. He seated me at a perfect vantage point. From here, I could see Robert Morrison Jr., Bobby to his friends, holding court at his regular table. The CFO looked exactly like his social media photos. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of tan that spoke of regular trips to private islands. I ordered a martini and waited, watching Bobby work through his usual routine. Dirty martini, steak, frites, animated conversation with whatever young analyst was hoping to catch his eye this week. But tonight, his movements seemed tense. The laugh a bit too loud, the gestures a bit too sharp. My phone buzzed again. Linda had sent a photo. Sophie and Gustavo leaving his office together, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling. Once, that would have shattered me. Now, it was just another piece of the puzzle. I took another sip of my martini, remembering something Gustavo once told me about Bobby Morrison. Man's got 3 weaknesses: young blondes, age bourbon, and his own reflection. Use any of those. You've got him. The bourbon part was already working. I could see his glass being refilled for the 3rd time. Time for the next move. I pulled out my compact mirror, angling it to catch the light. As if by accident, the reflection hit Bobby's eyes. He squinted, looked over. I pretended not to notice, taking another sip of my martini. 3, 2, 1. Isabella? Isabella Reynolds? I turned, arranging my features into perfect surprise. Bobby. What a lovely coincidence. Join me for a drink? He was all ready, signaling Henri. I'm just finishing up here, and, well, I heard about you and Gustavo. Terrible business. I hesitated just long enough to make him work for it. I shouldn't. Please. After all these years of charity boards and golf tournaments, you're practically family. Family. If he only knew what his company's merger was about to do to his actual family's legacy. Well, I smiled, gathering my purse. Perhaps just one drink. As I moved to his table, I caught my reflection in the restaurant's mirror. I looked exactly like what Bobby saw. A vulnerable, elegant woman nursing a broken heart. Perfect. What he couldn't see was the notebook in my purse, filled with questions about Morrison Corp's unusual stock patterns, or my phone recording. Every word of our upcoming conversation. The thing about men like Bobby Morrison, they love to explain things to women they think are falling apart, especially after their 4th bourbon. I settled into the chair across from him, letting my smile tremble just slightly. You're so kind, Bobby. I've been feeling so lost lately. He reached across the table, patting my hand. Let me tell you what's really going on with the business world these days, Isabella. Starting with this fascinating merger we're working on. I took a sip of my fresh martini, letting my eyes go wide and attentive. Inside, I was smiling. Sometimes the best way to get answers isn't to ask questions. It's to be the person everyone underestimates. Gustavo had taught me that, though not in the way he intended. Linda's office felt different in the morning light, less shadowy, more clinical. She'd set up a makeshift evidence board on one wall, covered with photos, documents, and red string connecting various points. At the center was a photo of Gustavo, looking exactly like the man I'd woken up next to for 15 years. Strange how someone could look the same but become a stranger. "Your dinner with Bobby Morrison was productive," Linda said, taping up. A new photo. Bobby and me at Le Colonial, his hand gesturing expansively as he explained something. He talked for nearly 3 hours. And after his 5th bourbon, he talked about everything except his golf handicap. I stepped closer to the YAE board, studying the web of connections, including some very interesting details about the merger timeline. Linda picked up her notebook. The recording quality was excellent. His comment about aggressive valuation strategies was particularly interesting, especially since the company's books show significant discrepancies in the 3rd quarter. I pulled out Professor Walsh's folder. "Catherine, Professor Walsh helped me analyze the public filings. The numbers don't match Bobby's drunk ramblings." "Speaking of numbers," Linda handed me a stack of photographs. "These were taken at the Waldorf last week. Your husband seems to have expensive taste in hotels." The photos showed Gustavo and Sophie entering the hotel's private elevator, him guiding her with a hand on the small of her back. The same gesture he'd used with me countless times. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to keep looking. "Wait." I held up one photo. "Go back to the lobby shot." Linda raised an eyebrow, but pulled out the wider angle. There, in the background, barely noticeable, a man I recognized from Morrison Corp's board meetings, entering the hotel through a side door. "That's James Wheeler," I said, my pulse quickening. "He's on Morrison's audit committee. He shouldn't be anywhere near private meetings about the merger." "There's more." Linda pulled out another set of photos. "Wheeler's been making regular trips to the Cayman Islands. And look who else has offshore accounts." She laid out bank statements, wire transfers, complex webs of shell companies, all leading back to one name, Sophie Lancaster. "She's not just sleeping with my husband," I murmured, pieces clicking into place. "She's his cutout, the perfect combination, young, ambitious, seemingly independent. No obvious connection to the real players. Except you found one." Linda pointed to a document. Her law school thesis supervised by James Wheeler's wife. The laugh that escaped me held no humor. Of course. Claire Wheeler was a visiting professor at Northwestern. She would have been the perfect person to spot talented students who could be useful. Linda started connecting new strings on the board. Wheeler introduces Sophie to his wife. Wife mentors Sophie. Sophie gets fast-tracked into Gustavo's firm. And suddenly, a massive merger appears with unusual valuation methods and unusual stock movements. I pulled out my phone, showing Linda the trading patterns I'd been tracking. "Look at these spikes. Always 2 days after Gustavo's late meetings at the Waldorf. Classic insider trading pattern." Linda's voice was grim. "But proving it, we don't have to prove it yet." I sat down, spreading the documents across her desk. "We just have to follow the money. Every transaction leaves a trace. Every meeting has witnesses. Every lie has a weak point." My phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte. "Mom's worried sick. Please call her." I ignored it, focusing on the evidence board. "What about the other board members, the ones who resigned suddenly?" Linda pulled out more photos. 3 resignations in 2 months, all citing personal reasons. But look at this. She showed me surveillance photos of all 3 former board members. Each one had met with Sophie Lancaster in the weeks before their resignations. "She's not just Gustavo's mistress," I said slowly. "She's his cleaner, meeting with board members who might cause problems, probably offering combinations of threats and payoffs." "Smart plan," Linda admitted. "Young, beautiful woman who seems harmless. No one suspects..." A knock at the door cut her off. Linda's assistant poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She handed Linda a tablet with a breaking news alert. My heart stopped when I saw the headline, "Morrison Merger Fast-Tracked. Deal to Close Within Month." Below was a photo of Gustavo and Sophie, standing together at a press conference. His hand was on her back again, but this time it wasn't hidden in a hotel lobby. This was a public declaration. "They're accelerating the timeline," I said, my voice tight. "Which means they know someone's asking questions." Linda was already reaching for her phone. "We need to move faster." I stared at the photo, at Gustavo's confident smile, at Sophie's polished perfection. They thought they had it all figured out. The perfect crime, the perfect cover story, the perfect way to discard an inconvenient wife. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I picked up my purse, pulling out a small leather agenda. "You know what today is, Linda?" She glanced at her calendar. "Thursday?" "The third Thursday of the month." I opened the agenda to today's date. For the past 10 years, I've hosted the Partners' Wives Luncheon every third Thursday. Gustavo always said it was crucial for firm politics, keeping the wives happy, managing the social networks. Linda's eyes narrowed. "And today?" "Today, I'm still hosting it, because none of these women know about the divorce yet. They're all coming to my penthouse in..." I checked my watch. 3 hours, including Claire Wheeler. "Isabella..." Linda's voice held a warning note. "Be careful. These women are exactly like me," I finished. "Women who gave up careers, who managed their husbands' social lives, who know every secret and slight and scandal. Women who've been watching Sophie Lancaster climb the ladder suspiciously fast." I gathered my things, a plan forming. While their husbands are at that press conference, celebrating their brilliant merger, I'll be having lunch with the very people they've all underestimated. And what will you tell them? I thought about all the times I'd sat at those lunches, listening to careful conversations about charity events and school choices, while underneath ran currents of power and knowledge that the men never suspected. "Nothing they don't already suspect," I said, heading for the door. "I'm just going to confirm some rumors, plant some seeds. After all, isn't that what these lunches are for?" Linda called after me. "What about your mother, your sister?" I paused in the doorway. "Tell them I'm fine. Tell them I'm handling things my way." Outside, Chicago's business district was coming alive, men in expensive suits hurrying to the press conference, ready to celebrate another triumph of corporate strategy. None of them glanced twice at me. Just another elegant woman in Louboutins, probably. Heading to a charity meeting or salon appointment. Perfect. I hailed a cab, directing it to the florist first. After all, I had a luncheon to host, and every detail needed to be flawless. Just like the trap I was setting. The flowers had to be perfect. White peonies and pale pink roses, arranged just so in antique crystal vases, the ones Gustavo's mother had given us as a wedding present. I'd positioned them strategically around the penthouse, dining room, living room, even the powder room where I knew the women would gather to whisper and reapply their lipstick. "Mrs. Reynolds?" Marcus called through the intercom. "Mrs. Davidson has arrived. Send her up, please." I smoothed my navy St. John dress. Classic, elegant, expensive. The uniform of a woman in control. Patricia Davidson was always first, had been for a decade. Wife of the firm's founding partner, she considered punctuality a virtue and gossip an art form. She stepped off the elevator exactly 15 minutes early, perfect in Chanel and pearls. "Isabella, darling." Her air kisses barely disturbed her. Immaculate makeup. Then she paused, really looking at me. "We weren't sure you'd still be hosting, given the circumstances." "Why wouldn't I?" I guided her to the living room, where champagne was already chilling. "Some traditions are sacred, aren't they?" She settled onto the sofa, accepting a flute, of Christelle. That's very brave of you, dear. Though I suppose with the merger announcement this morning. Oh, was there an announcement? I kept my voice light, pouring myself a glass. I've been so busy with the luncheon preparations. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. We both knew I was lying. More importantly, we both knew why I was lying. This was how our world worked, in subtle signals and calculated understatements. The elevator chimed again. And again. Within 20 minutes, the penthouse filled with the gentle buzz of expensive perfume and practiced laughs. 12 women, all carefully groomed, all experts in the delicate dance of power and propriety. Claire Wheeler arrived last, her entrance, perfectly timed to draw attention. She'd worn red, a power move if I'd ever seen one. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the moment she realized I wasn't going to play the role of devastated wife. "Ladies," I called, gesturing to the dining room. "Shall we?" They moved like a well-choreographed ballet, taking their usual seats around my imported Italian table. Only one chair was conspicuously empty. Sophie Lancaster's mother had been a regular until her daughter's promotion. Isabella, Margaret Chen, wife of the firm's head of international law, leaned forward. "We've all been so worried. When we heard about Gustavo's announcement this morning." I smiled, serving the first course, chilled cucumber, soup, a summer favorite. The merger is exciting news, isn't it? A ripple of uncomfortable glances circled the table. These women had watched me host these lunches for years, had seen me support Gustavo's rise through the ranks. They expected tears, cancellations, perhaps a dramatic scene. Instead, they got perfectly chilled soup and unruffled poise. "The timing seems rushed," Claire Wheeler offered, her voice carrying that particular tone wives used when testing waters. "James mentioned something about regulatory concerns." "Did he?" I took a delicate sip of soup. "How interesting. Patricia, didn't your Henry handle the Bradbury merger last year? The one with all those SEC complications?" Patricia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. The Bradbury merger, where thousands of employees lost their pensions, while the executives walked away with golden parachutes. Henry Davidson had barely escaped disbarment. "Yes," she said carefully, "though this seems different." "Everything seems different lately," I mused, signaling for the main course to be served. Change can be so sudden, can't it? One day you're having dinner at Gibson's, celebrating your 15th anniversary, and the next. Gibson's? Elizabeth Murray, whose husband was up for junior partner, frowned. "But weren't they just there last week? The young associate. What's her name?" "Sophie Lancaster," Claire Wheeler cut in sharply. "A brilliant young woman. I mentored her myself at Northwestern." "How fortunate for her," I said softly, watching the servers place perfectly seared salmon before each guest. "To have such dedicated mentors." The air in the room shifted. These women weren't stupid. They'd all seen similar patterns before. The late meetings, the sudden promotions, the convenient mentorships. Some had been the younger women once. Others had been the wives replaced. "The Morrison merger," Margaret Chen said suddenly. "My husband says the numbers are unusual. The valuation metrics. Numbers can be so complex." I reached for my wine glass. "Almost as complex as relationships, wouldn't you say, Claire? How is James handling the audit committee these days?" Claire Wheeler's knuckles whitened around, her fork. "He's very busy. Aren't they all?" Patricia Davidson's voice dripped with practiced concern. "These long hours, these private meetings. Elizabeth, didn't you mention seeing James at the Waldorf last week?" Elizabeth blushed. I wasn't sure if I should mention." "Please." I touched her hand gently. We're all friends here. This is our safe space, isn't it, ladies? Where we can share our concerns. The conversation flowed like the wine. Careful at first, then looser. Stories emerged. Sophie Lancaster seen entering private elevators, James Wheeler's suspicious trips, stock trades just before major announcements. Each woman added a piece to the puzzle, while I simply listened, occasionally nudging the discussion, with a well-placed question or concerned murmur. By dessert, individual lemon soufflés, Gustavo's favorite, the mood had shifted entirely. These weren't just society wives anymore. They were women who had seen too much, who had their own scores to settle. Isabella, Patricia Davidson caught me in the kitchen as I prepared coffee. You should know. Henry's been concerned about this merger. The liability issues alone. I squeezed her hand. Patricia, you've always been so kind to me. Like a mother, really. I'm sure Henry values your discretion. She understood immediately. In our world, that kind of statement wasn't just gratitude. It was a promise. A partnership. As the women began to leave, each one hugged me a little longer than usual. Each one whispered something. A private phone number, a piece of information, an offer of support. Claire Wheeler was last, her red dress now looking less like power and more like a warning. You're playing a dangerous game, she murmured as I handed her her coat. No, Claire. I met her eyes steadily. I'm just following the rules we all learned long ago. The ones about loyalty, discretion, and consequences. After they left, I stood in my empty penthouse, surrounded by the remnants of the luncheon. Empty, champagne glasses, scattered napkins, the lingering scent of expensive perfume and shared secrets. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. How did it go? I snapped a photo of my handwritten notes, lists of names and dates and connections that would make any investigator proud. The wives of Chicago's most powerful lawyers just gave us everything we need. Another buzz, this time from an unknown number. A photo appeared. Gustavo and Sophie at the merger press conference, his hand possessively on her waist. I didn't delete it. Instead, I forwarded it to Patricia Davidson, knowing she'd share it with the others. Sometimes the best revenge isn't action. It's simply letting the right people see the truth. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows through my wall of windows. Somewhere in the city, Gustavo was probably celebrating his triumph, never suspecting that his perfectly constructed world was already beginning to crack. I picked up one of the peonies from a centerpiece, studying its delicate petals. Such a fragile thing, yet when arranged properly, part of something powerful and beautiful. Just like secrets, just like revenge. The SEC filing appeared in my inbox at 3:47 a.m., forwarded by Patricia Davidson with a single comment. Thought you should see this. I sat up in bed, the same bed Gustavo and I had shared for over a decade, and clicked the attachment. Sleep could wait. War doesn't follow business hours. Form 8K, the document companies file when something significant happens. This one detailed James Wheeler's sudden resignation from Morrison Corp's audit committee, effective immediately. Personal reasons, of course. They were always personal reasons. My phone lit up. Linda. Did you see it? She asked without preamble. Wheeler's out. I got up, padding to the kitchen for coffee. A week after our little luncheon. Interesting. Timing. More interesting than you know. Keys clicked in the background. His wife moved $6 million to a Cayman account yesterday, right before the resignation hit. Claire Wheeler, making her move. The first domino was falling. The other wives? I asked, measuring coffee beans into the grinder, the one ritual I'd kept from my married life. Already spreading the word. Check your email again. A new message popped up. A group text chain between the partners' wives, sharing links to the SEC filing. The comments were carefully worded, But the subtext was clear. Blood was in the water. Patricia Davidson sent it to 3 financial reporters. Linda continued. By market open, Wheeler's resignation will be more than just a footnote. I poured hot water over the grounds, watching the coffee bloom. What about Sophie? She was at the Waldorf again last night, but not with Gustavo. My hand stilled on the pour-over. Who? Bobby Morrison. They spent 2 hours in the private dining room. I have photos. Of course. The young associate, meeting with the nervous CFO. History, repeating itself. But this time I was ready. Send them to Patricia, I said. She has a standing tennis date with Bobby's wife this morning. The sun was rising over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. From my window, I could see early morning runners along the Lakefront Trail, their lives untouched by corporate intrigue and calculated betrayal. My phone buzzed again. Charlotte. Mom's birthday dinner is tonight, she said when I answered. Are you coming? I'd forgotten. Between the luncheon fallout and Wheeler's resignation, I'd lost track of normal life events. I can't, Charlotte. I'm in the middle of something. You're always in the middle of something lately. Her voice softened. We're worried about you, Bella. This revenge thing, it's not you. But wasn't it? Hadn't I always been capable of this? The strategic thinking, the careful manipulation of social dynamics. I'd just used those skills to build Gustavo's world instead of dismantling it. I have to go, I said, watching a news alert pop up on my laptop. Wheeler's resignation is hitting the morning shows. Bella? I ended the call, focusing on the financial news stream. The headlines were already spinning. Key Morrison Corp. Executive resigns amid merger questions. The stock was down in pre-market trading. A text from Professor Walsh. My colleagues are asking questions, the right questions. Another from Linda. Sophie just canceled 3 meetings. She's spooked. The dominoes were falling faster now. I dressed carefully. Charcoal Armani suit, pearl earrings, subtle makeup. The armor of a woman who had nothing to hide. Today would require precision. The elevator opened onto the lobby, where Marcus was already holding the door. Car's here, Mrs. Reynolds. But instead of my usual driver, Patricia Davidson's trusted chauffeur stood waiting. Patricia herself sat in the back seat. Get in, she said, sliding over. We need to talk. I settled into the leather seat as the car pulled away from the curb. Patricia looked immaculate as always, but there was an edge to her expression I'd never seen before. Henry's being called before the ethics committee, she said without preamble. The Wheeler connection. There are questions about the Bradbury merger. Old cases being reopened. The car turned onto Michigan Avenue, joining the morning traffic. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? She turned to face me fully. Because this started after your luncheon, after you so carefully reminded everyone about Bradbury. I simply mentioned a historical fact. You started a war. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. The wives are talking. The reporters are digging. Claire Wheeler's running scared. And now my Henry. Your Henry, I cut in softly, helped build the system that let men like Gustavo and James Wheeler think they were untouchable. That let them discard loyal wives and cover up corrupt deals. Patricia was quiet for a moment, watching the city scroll past. What do you want? Justice. No. Her eyes met mine. What do you really want? I thought about Gustavo's text message, about Sophie's smug smile in the paper, about years of suppressed ambition and careful silence. I want them to understand what it feels like, I said finally. To watch everything they built crumble. To know it's coming but be unable to stop it. To realize that every relationship they thought they could count on has turned against them. Patricia nodded slowly. Henry's not innocent. But he's not the architect of this merger mess either. He can help. How? Files, she said. Records from the Bradbury case that never made it to court. Patterns that match what's happening with Morrison. She pulled out a USB drive. Consider it insurance. For both of us. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Why? Because I've been where you are. Her smile was razor sharp. 20 years ago, Henry had his own Sophie. I chose to stay, to play the loyal wife. But I never forgot, and I never forgave. The car stopped outside my old law school. Professor Walsh would be waiting in her office, ready to analyze Patricia's files. The ethics committee meets Friday, Patricia said as I reached for the door. Henry will be cooperative, but Isabella? She caught my wrist. When this all comes down, when you finished burning their world to ash, remember who helped light the match. I stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching the USB drive. Above me, clouds gathered over Chicago's skyline, a storm approaching. Perfect weather for what was coming. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photo of Sophie leaving the Waldorf last night, looking anxious. Below it, a message. From Linda. Bobby Morrison's wife just filed for divorce. Guess that tennis game was interesting. Another domino down. I climbed the law school steps, each click of my heels echoing with purpose. Behind me, Patricia's car pulled away, carrying another piece of the revenge I'd set in motion. The game was changing. What had started as personal vengeance was becoming something larger, a reckoning for an entire system built on exploitation and betrayal. Gustavo had taught me well. In law, as in life, timing is everything. And the time for simply being hurt was over. Now it was time to be ruthless. Professor Walsh's office hummed with tension as we reviewed Patricia's files. 3 hours of digging through digital breadcrumbs had revealed an ugly pattern, one that stretched far beyond my personal vendetta. Look at this, Catherine pointed to her screen. The Bradbury merger, the Wilson acquisition, now Morrison. Same. Players, same methods, different victims. I leaned closer, scanning the document. A memo from 5 years ago, detailing how the firm had systematically hidden corporate losses through a maze of offshore accounts. Henry Davidson's signature at the bottom, next to a younger James Wheeler's. They've been doing this for years, I murmured. Using the same playbook. And the same fall guys. Catherine pulled up another file. Mid-level executives, minority shareholders, pension funds, all sacrificed to protect the architects. My phone buzzed. Linda's update. Gustavo just called. An emergency partners meeting. Full attendance required. I checked the time. 2:47 p.m. The markets would close in just over an hour. Send me everything, I told Catherine, gathering my things. I need to... The office door burst open. Charlotte stood there, face flushed, eyes wild. What the hell are you doing, Bella? I froze. How did you... Find you? Mom's birthday dinner. Wasn't just an invitation. It was an intervention. When you didn't show, I traced your phone. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. The whole city's talking about the Morrison merger collapse, about Sophie Lancaster's overnight resignation, about Gustavo. Charlotte, no. She held up a hand. You don't get to explain this away. Do you know what they're saying? That the partners' wives orchestrated a corporate takedown, that years of deals are being investigated, that careers, hundreds of careers, are about to be destroyed. I felt Catherine shift, beside me, quietly gathering the incriminating documents. They deserved it, I said finally. All of them. They built fortunes on lies, destroyed lives without consequence. And what about the innocent people? Charlotte's voice cracked. The junior associates, the support staff, the families who depend on these jobs. Did they deserve it too? The question hit me like a physical blow. In my focus on the corrupt core of the firm, had I forgotten about the wider ripples? My phone buzzed again. A news alert. Morrison Corp stock halted amid investigation rumors. You're not just hurting Gustavo anymore, Charlotte continued, softer now. You're burning down an entire world. And for what? Revenge? Justice, I corrected automatically, but the word felt hollow. Is that what Mom would call it? Our mother, the woman who taught us forgiveness, who believed that living well was the best revenge, who was probably sitting at home right now, birthday dinner canceled, worried sick about her daughter's descent into vengeance. Before I could respond, my phone exploded with notifications. Linda, Patricia, headlines, all demanding attention. Breaking FBI raids, Morrison Corp offices. Sophie Lancaster, cooperating with federal investigation, major law firm partners under scrutiny. Charlotte grabbed my phone, scrolling through the chaos. Jesus, Bella, what did you do? What they taught me to do, I whispered. I played their game, used their rules, exploited their weaknesses, and became exactly like them in the process. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth. In my quest to destroy Gustavo's world, had I corrupted my own soul? Catherine cleared her throat. Isabella, you need to see this. She turned her computer screen toward us. A live feed from the firm's lobby showed FBI agents entering the building. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Sophie Lancaster, head down, escorted by federal agents. She flipped, I realized. The ethics committee meeting, the pressure from the wives, Bobby Morrison's divorce. It was too much. And now? Charlotte demanded. What happens to all the people caught in your crossfire? My phone buzzed one final time. A text from Gustavo, the first direct contact since his cruel goodbye. Why? You've destroyed everything. Looking at his words, I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but a hollow ache where vengeance had burned so bright. I need to go, I said suddenly, gathering my things. Where? Charlotte caught my arm. To watch the destruction. You've caused? No. I met her eyes. To fix what I can. I ran down the law school steps, my heels echoing in the empty hallway. Outside, rain had started to fall. A heavy, cleansing downpour that soaked through my careful armor. Linda was waiting in her car. The FBI wants to talk to you, she said as I slid into the passenger seat. As a witness, not a target. You're still clean in this. Are any of us clean? I watch raindrops race down the window. When did this stop being about justice and start being about power? The moment you realized you had it. Linda's voice was gentle. The question is, what are you going to do with it now? I thought about Charlotte's words, about my mother's canceled birthday dinner, about all the innocent lives caught in the blast radius of my revenge. Take me to the federal building, I said finally. I need to make a deal. For Gustavo? For everyone. Who doesn't deserve to go down with him? The car moved through Chicago's rain-slicked streets. On my phone, the headlines kept coming. Careers ending, reputations shattering, a system of corruption finally exposed to the light. I'd wanted Gustavo to understand what it felt like to lose everything. Now I understood too. The cost of revenge isn't just paid by your enemies. It's paid by everyone around you, guilty and innocent alike. Charlotte was right. I'd become what I hated. Someone who saw people as pawns, relationships as weapons. But maybe there was still time to become something else. Someone else. I opened my phone's contacts, scrolling to my mother's number. It was time to make a different kind of deal. Not with the FBI or the corrupt partners, but with myself. Time to find out if there was more power in mercy than in vengeance. The federal building's interview room was deliberately uncomfortable. Hard. Chairs, harsh lighting, a subtle reminder of who held the power. Special Agent Sarah Martinez sat across from me, her dark eyes studying my face as I finished my statement. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, reviewing her notes. "You're saying the insider trading scheme predates the Morrison merger? That it's been going on for years?" "Since Bradbury, at least." I slid Patricia Davidson's USB drive across the table. "Everything's here. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the pattern of how they chose their targets." Martinez pocketed the drive. "And your husband? How much did you know about his involvement?" The question I'd been dreading. Gustavo was ambitious, not original. He learned from Henry Davidson, who learned from others before him. The system was in place long before we married. But you supported it, facilitated it even. I played my part. The admission tasted bitter. The perfect corporate wife, hosting dinners, managing relationships, keeping secrets. Until you didn't. I met her gaze steadily. Until he reminded me who I really was. Martinez leaned back, something like understanding crossing her face. "A lawyer, top of your class at Northwestern. You could have been one of them." I chose to be invisible instead. It seemed safer. And now? I thought about Charlotte's words, about the ripple effects of my revenge. Now I want to make it right. Not just expose the corruption, but help the people caught in the crossfire. The junior associates, support staff, everyone who trusted the system. They deserve better than becoming collateral damage in my vendetta. Martinez was quiet for a moment, shuffling through documents. "We've been building this case for months. Sophie Lancaster came to us weeks ago, but we needed more. Your actions, the wives' network, the strategic leaks, they forced everyone's hands. I didn't know about your investigation. But you knew something was wrong. You just needed a personal reason to act on it." The truth of her words stung. How long had I ignored the signs, accepted the excuses, told myself it wasn't my problem? My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Turn on the news," Martinez noticed, nodding toward the small TV in the corner. She clicked it on, and there was Gustavo, being led out of the firm in handcuffs. The headline beneath, "Major Law Firm Partners. Arrested in Fraud Scheme." "Your husband's attorney has been reaching out," Martinez said. "He wants to make a deal." Of course he did. Gustavo always had an exit strategy. What kind of deal? The kind where he gives up everyone above him. Davidson, Wheeler, the whole chain of command. She paused. "He's also offering details about your involvement." I almost laughed. I was never involved in the actual fraud. He made sure of that, kept me focused on parties and charity events. But you knew, and in the eyes of the law, I'm a witness. I straightened, in my chair, one who's willing to testify about years of systematic corruption, about how they chose their victims, about all the lives they destroyed while building their fortunes. Martinez studied me for a long moment. "And what do you want in return?" "Protection for the innocent, a fund for the employees who'll lose their jobs, a chance to help rebuild something better from the ashes." That's very noble. Her tone suggested she didn't quite believe me. "It's practical." I pulled out my phone, showing her the messages flooding in. Junior associates seeking guidance, support staff terrified about their futures, families facing uncertain futures. These people trusted the firm, trusted me. I won't abandon them to save myself. A knock at the door interrupted us. Another agent entered, whispering something in Martinez's ear. Her eyebrows rose. It seems Patricia Davidson has also decided to cooperate. She's turning over decades of records, private accounts, client lists, everything. I closed my eyes, briefly. Patricia playing her final card. Her price? Immunity for herself, limited charges for Henry, and Martinez checked her notes. A seat on the Victim Compensation Committee. Of course. Patricia would emerge from this chaos as a whistleblower, a champion of justice. She'd learned long ago how to turn disaster into opportunity. My phone buzzed, again. Charlotte. Mom wants to see you, now. The weight of everything, the arrests, the deals, the lives in balance, pressed down on me. I'd started this to destroy Gustavo's world, but in doing so, I'd shattered so many others. Agent Martinez? I stood, gathering my things. I need a few hours. There's someone I need to see. She nodded. We'll need you back for a formal statement. And Isabella? Her voice softened slightly. Be careful. Men like your husband when they're cornered. I know. I thought of the text he'd sent, the raw fury behind those words. But I'm not afraid anymore. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean. Linda waited in her car. Your mother's place? She asked as I slid in. Yes. I watched the federal building recede in the mirror. It's time to face a different kind of judgment. We drove through Chicago's streets, past the firm's building, where FBI agents were still leading people out, past the restaurants where I'd played the perfect wife, past all the landmarks of my old life. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from the partners' wives, from journalists, from people caught in the blast radius of truth. Each one a reminder of the power I'd wielded, the changes I'd set in motion. Do you regret it? Linda asked quietly. I thought about Gustavo's face on the news, about Sophie's desperate cooperation, about all the lives changed forever. I regret not seeing it sooner, I said finally, not understanding that revenge isn't just about destroying your enemies. It's about choosing what kind of person you become in the process. We pulled up to my mother's building, the same modest apartment where I'd grown up, where I'd dreamed of being a lawyer before I'd settled for being a wife. Want me to wait? Linda asked. No. I stepped out into the evening air. This conversation needs to happen without witnesses. Above, I could see my mother's kitchen light glowing warm and steady. Charlotte's silhouette moved past the window. It was time to face the truest judgment of all, the reflection of myself in my mother's eyes. Time to see if the person I'd become was someone worth forgiving. My mother's apartment smelled like cinnamon and coffee, her solution to every crisis since I was a child. The small kitchen where she'd raised 2 daughters alone after Dad died looked exactly the same. Yellow curtains, well-worn oak table, decades of family photos on the walls. Including, I noticed with a pang, my wedding picture with Gustavo. Bella. Mom stood at the stove, her back to me, not turning around, not yet. Charlotte said you've been busy. Mom, sit. She pointed to my old spot at the table, still not looking at me. Coffee first. Talk after. Charlotte sat in the living room, pretending to read a magazine but watching us over its edges. The silence stretched, broken only by the gentle clink of Mom's spoon against ceramic as she prepared 3 cups of café con leche, the way she'd made it every morning of my childhood. Finally, she set the cups down and took her seat. Only then did she meet my eyes. I saw the news, she said quietly. Your husband in handcuffs, his firm in ruins, all those people. She took a sip of coffee. Is this what you wanted? The question hung in the air, heavier than all the FBI interviews, all the headlines, all the chaos I'd unleashed. I wanted him to hurt, I admitted, like he hurt me. And now? Now. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, anchoring myself. Now I understand what you always said about revenge being a double-edged sword. She studied me over the rim of her cup. Tell me something, Isabella Maria. When did you stop being my daughter and become… This calculating woman who destroys lives for vengeance, who misses her mother's birthday because she's too busy bringing down corporate empires. Her voice cracked slightly. The daughter I raised believed in justice, yes, but also in mercy. From the living room, Charlotte made a small sound, something between agreement and sympathy. They weren't innocent, Mom. The corruption, the fraud, it went back years. They destroyed people's lives, stole their savings. And that gave you the right to be judge, jury, and executioner? She shook her head. You're not God, Bella. You don't get to decide who deserves destruction. What about what I deserved? The words burst out before I could stop them. 15 years of my life, my career, my dreams, all sacrificed for him. And he threw me away with a text message. A text message, Mom. So you threw away your soul in return? The question hit like a physical blow. In the living room, Charlotte set down her magazine, moving to join us at the table. The FBI agent, I said slowly. She told me they'd been building this case for months, that Sophie Lancaster had already come forward, that it was all going to come out anyway. But you couldn't wait for justice, Charlotte interjected. You had to orchestrate your own. Mom reached across the table, taking my hand. Her fingers were warm from the coffee cup, familiar and grounding. Tell me about the others. What others? The ones caught in your crossfire, the innocent ones. What happens to them? I told them about the Victim Compensation Fund, about my plans to help the junior staff find new positions, about trying to salvage something good from the wreckage. And Gustavo? Mom's grip tightened slightly. What happens to him? He's trying to make a deal, to give up everyone above him. Of course he is. A hint of bitterness in her voice. She'd never fully trusted him, I realized. Mother's intuition. And you? I'm cooperating with the investigation. As a witness. Charlotte leaned forward. But, I took a deep breath. His lawyer contacted mine. He's threatening to implicate me. To claim I knew everything. That I was part of it from the beginning. Mom's coffee cup hit the saucer with a sharp clink. He wouldn't. He would. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. He already suggested to the FBI that I orchestrated everything out of spite, that I used the partners' wives to create chaos because I was a vindictive ex. Can he prove it? No, I was careful. Everything I did was legal, exposing truth, not creating lies. I met my mother's eyes. You taught me that, remember? The truth is a weapon that never needs reloading. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Your father used to say that. I know. I glanced at his photo on the wall, the last Christmas before the cancer took him. I think I forgot who I was for a while, trying to be the perfect corporate wife, then trying to be the perfect avenger. I forgot about being his daughter. Your daughter. Mom stood suddenly, moving to the kitchen counter. She returned with a small jewelry box I recognized. Her treasures, she'd always called it. Look, she said, opening it. Inside lay Dad's old watch, her wedding ring, and my law school acceptance letter, creased and worn from repeated folding. You kept it? To remind me. She touched the paper gently. Of who you really are. Not Gustavo's wife. Not some society hostess. But my brilliant girl who was going to change the world through justice, not vengeance. Charlotte reached over, squeezing my hand. Maybe you still can. My phone buzzed. Agent Martinez. New development. Need you at the office. Go, Mom said, reading my expression. But Bella, remember something. What? Forgiveness isn't just about pardoning others. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself. I stood, hugging her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of cinnamon and coffee and unconditional love. I'm sorry about your birthday. There will be others. She pulled back, framing my face with her hands. Just make sure you're there for them, the real you, not whoever you've been pretending to be. Outside, Linda waited patiently in her car. The sun was setting, painting Chicago's skyline in shades of redemption. The Federal Building? She asked as I slid in. No. I looked at the messages flooding my phone. Desperate colleagues, reporters, more revelations emerging every hour. Take me to the firm first. There are people who need to hear the truth from me, face to face. You sure? After everything? Yes. I thought about Mom's words, about forgiveness and truth, and who I really was. It's time to stop hiding behind schemes and strategies. Time to face the consequences of what I've done, good and bad. As we drove through the gathering dusk, I realized something. The power I'd felt orchestrating Gustavo's downfall was nothing compared to the strength it would take to help rebuild from the ashes. But maybe that was the point all along. Maybe true justice isn't about destroying your enemies, but about restoring what they broke, including yourself. 1 year later, I stood in front of Northwestern Law's graduating class, adjusting the microphone. The spring sun warmed my face through the auditorium's high windows, catching on the silver threads in Professor Walsh's hair as she introduced me. Our next speaker needs little introduction, she said, her voice carrying across the packed room. Former prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, now heading the Corporate Accountability Project. Isabella Reynolds. The applause felt surreal, so different from the silence that had followed me through courthouse corridors during the trials last year. I stepped to the podium, looking out at the sea of eager faces. So many dreams, so many paths ahead of them. A year ago, I began. I stood in a federal building giving evidence against some of Chicago's most powerful attorneys, including my ex-husband. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. The case had made headlines for months. Today, I'm here to talk about choices, about power, about the difference between justice and revenge. From the front row, my mother smiled encouragingly. Beside her, Charlotte bounced her 2-month-old daughter, my niece, named Maria, after our grandmother. New life, new beginnings. The law gives us enormous power, I continued. The power to build or destroy, to protect or punish, to reveal truth or bury it. But the most important lesson I learned isn't taught in any classroom. It's about what that power costs, not just others, but ourselves. My phone buzzed silently, in my pocket. Probably Linda, confirming our meeting with the latest group of whistleblowers. The work never stopped, but now it had purpose beyond vengeance. When I graduated from this school, I was top of my class. Like many of you, I had dreams of changing the world. Instead, I chose a different path. I became the perfect corporate, wife, supporting my husband's rise through Chicago's legal elite. I told myself I was still serving justice, just differently. In the audience, I spotted James Wheeler's daughter, a first-year student now. Our eyes met briefly. Her father was serving 15 years, her mother Claire living in reduced circumstances in Milwaukee. Actions have consequences, rippling outward forever. Then everything fell apart. My husband's betrayal, a corrupt merger, years of fraud exposed. I had a choice: let the system handle it, or take matters into my own hands. I chose revenge. And yes, it worked. The guilty were punished. Justice was served. But the cost? I paused, remembering the faces of junior associates clearing out their desks, support staff crying in the elevators, families destroyed alongside the guilty. The cost was nearly my own soul. The room was silent now, every face focused, every future lawyer weighing their own potential choices. Gustavo, my ex-husband, is serving 20 years. The Morrison merger fraud led to indictments across 3 states. The system we exposed had tentacles everywhere. But here's what I learned. Destroying corruption isn't enough. You have to build something better in its place. My phone buzzed. Again. This time I glanced at it. A message from Bobby Morrison's wife, now running a support group for families affected by corporate fraud. Another from Patricia Davidson, who'd reinvented herself as an ethics consultant after Henry's conviction. That's why I'm here. Not just to warn you about Power's corruption, but to remind you of Power's potential. The Corporate Accountability Project has helped hundreds of fraud victims recover their savings. Former firm employees have found new positions, better positions, in firms committed to ethical practice. And I smiled, feeling the truth of it. I finally became the lawyer I was meant to be, just by a more complicated path than I'd planned. In the back of the auditorium, I spotted Agent Martinez. She nodded slightly. Our weekly meeting about new cases would wait. Some moments deserve full attention. You're entering the legal profession at a crucial time. The old systems are crumbling, but what replaces them? That's up to you. Will you choose the easy path of looking away? Of accepting that's just how things work? Or will you have the courage to stand for something better? I thought of my mother's words about forgiveness, about truth as a weapon that never needs reloading. A year ago, I wanted revenge. I got it. But revenge, I learned, is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die. Justice, real justice, is harder. It requires not just exposing wrong, but fighting for right. Not just punishing the guilty, but protecting the innocent. Not just tearing down corrupt systems, but building ethical ones in their place. My voice softened, speaking now to each graduate individually. You have that power. Right now. Before. You've argued your first case or signed your first contract. The power to choose what kind of lawyer you'll be, what kind of person you'll be. In my mind, I saw Gustavo's face the last time I'd seen him, in court, as he was sentenced. The mixture of hatred and fear in his eyes. I'd thought I'd feel triumph. Instead, I felt only sadness for the man he'd chosen to become. The hardest lesson wasn't learning about the corruption. It wasn't even exposing it. It was facing myself in the mirror afterward and asking, who am I now? What do I stand for? What will I do with the truth I've learned? The sun had shifted, painting the auditorium in shades of possibility. In the front row, my mother held Maria, who had fallen asleep despite the speeches. Innocence and experience, wrapped in one small package. So I challenge you. Be better than we were. Be braver. When you see wrong, don't look away. When you have power, use it wisely. And when you face choices between easy profits and hard principles, remember this moment. Remember that you once sat here, full of dreams about justice and truth, before the world tried to teach you compromise. I gathered my notes, preparing to conclude. A year ago, I chose revenge and called it justice. Today, I choose something harder. The daily work of building a better system, of helping others find their voice against corruption, of remembering that every legal decision affects real lives, real families, real futures. The room was absolutely still, every face intent, every future lawyer weighing their own path. The law is powerful, but its greatest power isn't in punishment or revenge. It's in restoration, in healing what's broken, in making right what was wrong. That's the power I hope you'll choose to wield. As the applause began, I caught my mother's eye. She was crying, but smiling too. Proud tears this time, not the worried ones from a year ago. Later, walking across campus with her and Charlotte, Maria sleeping peacefully in her stroller. I felt the weight of the past year, but also its lessons, its growth, its odd, painful gifts. "You did good," Mom said, squeezing my hand. "Your father would be proud." I looked up at the law school building where everything had begun. My original dreams, my recent revenge, my current redemption. "I think I finally understand what he meant," I said. "About truth being a weapon that never needs reloading." "Oh?" "Truth isn't just about exposing lies. It's about facing yourself. All of yourself. The good and bad, the wounds and healing, the revenge and redemption." My phone buzzed one final time. Another whistleblower, another case, another chance to choose justice over vengeance. I was ready. The truth, after all, is a path that never really ends. You just learn to walk it better, step by step, choice by choice, day by day, until you become the person you were meant to be all along. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments below. We value your opinion. Click the like button if you enjoyed it and be sure to subscribe to receive more captivating stories. Activate the bell so that you're always the first to know when a new video is published. See you next time.